Hi guys, it's Alex here, and today we're going to be showing a trap in the Giuoco Pianissimo known as Chigorin Trap. The name comes from the fact that Mikhail Chigorin played it in St. Petersburg in 1874. Chigorin, for those of you who don't know him, was a leading Russian chess player in the 19th century, and in fact he was such a strong player that he contested 2 world championship matches against Wilhelm Steinitz. He did lose both, so he was never a world champion, but he is considered one of the last great players of the Romantic era of chess and one of the forefathers of the powerful Soviet chess school. So, let's get to the game. White starts with the move pawn to e4, and now Chigorin meets it with pawn e5. Knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop c4, the Italian game, bishop to c5, the classical variation. White castles, and here black develops his knight to f6. White can continue in several ways. One of them, for example, is the Deutz gambit, but in this case, white plays more quietly, defending the pawn on e4. He plays pawn to d3 and activating his bishop. Now, at this point, black does similarly and plays pawn to d6. Now white makes a move that could be said to be a little bit inaccurate, and he plays the move bishop to g5, pinning the knight. Now, the move is a very natural choice for white, but what we need to realize is that the position is almost symmetrical. We have these pawns from A to the E file. For white and for black, they are identically placed. We have the bishop symmetrical and we have the knight symmetrical. So the differences or the asymmetries in the position are that black has this knight on c6, white has the bishop on g5, and black has not castled yet. So for example, if white had played knight c3 and black had castled, we would have a totally symmetrical position. Noticing the asymmetries in a position is a good habit to get into because that can give you clues as to how to take advantage of your position or how to judge whether or not you have a better position than your opponent. In this case, the difference that black has not castled yet allows Chigorin to set a trap of sorts. He plays pawn to h6 and he hits the bishop. And now the bishop goes back, and Chigorin continues attacking the bishop. Now, if we had a different position where Chigorin had already castled, then this move pawn to g5 would be a very dangerous move because in some situations white could sacrifice a piece since the king would be feeling very, very vulnerable. White would only get 2 pawns for the sacrificed piece, but the knight here would be pinned and the king's defenselessness may be exploited by white later on. However, since black has not castled, g5 is a safe move to play. If knight takes g5, pawn takes g5, bishop takes g5, not only is the king much safer in the center, but black can immediately target this bishop with a move like rook g8, which would not be an option if your king was on g8. So, therefore, after the move g5, white had to drop his bishop back. And now comes Chigorin's idea. He sets a trap for white by playing h5. It seems as though Chigorin has forgotten to defend his pawn on g5. And what's more, if white captures this pawn, the pawn on f7 is also attacked. And if white can move again and capture on f7, he will attack both the rook and the queen. So black will suffer significant material losses. It was this fact that must have tempted white to capture the pawn on g5 and allow Chigorin to continue marching the h-pawn. We notice that the bishop on g3 has no square to go to, but white was confident that after knight takes pawn, he has already won 2 pawns And when black moves his queen, so as to avoid losing the queen, when black moves his queen, white would capture the rook, and though this bishop would be lost, a rook and 2 pawns is worth far more than a bishop. This is what white was almost certainly counting on, but Chigorin had another idea in mind. He plays an absolutely spectacular move. Now, with the help of computers, we know that the move Queen e7 is actually perhaps the best move in the position, but you have to admire and respect Chigorin's creative play. He captured the bishop, ignoring the threat on the queen. Now, it is too late for white to do anything other than to capture the queen. And at this point, Chigorin has lost a queen and 2 pawns, and white has only lost a bishop. It's hard to see where the logic is in this sacrifice. And this is what I mean when I say that it's such a creative decision by Chigorin. But in fact, it's quite a good decision, because now black has the move bishop g4, targeting the white queen. Black threatens to recover the queen, and so white moves his queen to d2 to save it. It's worth noting pawn to f3 is not possible because the bishop would be striking at the white king. So queen to d2 was played, and now black's piece play continues. Black brings his knight into play, knight to d4. Can you identify any threat for black? Most people, if asked what the threat is in this position, will say knight e2 check. Now, white does not want to capture the knight because the bishop is defending it, and so white would want to move his king to h1. But now we see the idea of opening up the h-file with the queen sacrifice earlier on. Black would take this pawn on h2, and it would be a beautiful checkmating pattern where the pawn, rook, and knight all combine to checkmate the enemy king. So, in this position, white felt that this threat needed to be stopped, and he played a very natural move, knight to c3, covering the e2 square. But he did not appreciate the full extent of Chigorin's creativity. Chigorin had one more crushing idea in this position. If he didn't have this one move, black would simply be losing. White's extra queen would be too much material. But he has one move. If you wish, you can pause the video and try and solve the puzzle. Black to play and win. Okay, now I will show the move. Black played knight to f3 check, making a further sacrifice. The king and the queen are forked, and if king goes to h1, black will not take the queen. He will simply checkmate. Rook takes h2. So therefore, after knight f3, the knight must be captured. And now, Chigorin calmly recaptures the pawn on f3. This game is a beautiful example of the coordination of the black pieces. Most of black's minor pieces have combined to create deadly threats against the white king. Now, the immediate threat is simply to capture this pawn and deliver checkmate with a pawn. The pawn is defended by the rook, and the remaining squares are covered by the bishop. White cannot capture with the f-pawn because the bishop on c5 is pinning that pawn. Finally, white cannot capture the pawn with the h-pawn because the bishop on f3 covers the h1 square. So now rook h1 will deliver checkmate. The only other attempt that white may go for is to move this rook anywhere along the first rank in order to allow the king to run away. But the king will not run for long, because after g takes h2, king f1, black will push the pawn and promote to a queen, and this will be checkmate. So, in this position, white could already resign, but he graciously allowed Chigorin to deliver checkmate by capturing the pawn on g3, and rook h1 ended the game. So I hope you enjoyed Chigorin's Trap. He truly was one of the greats of his time, and I would advise to anybody who wants to not only improve their chess, but also enjoy chess and watch beautiful games, to take a look at some of Mikhail Chigorin's games, one of the last and greatest players of the Romantic era of chess. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.